When 300 alien warships arrived at Earth demanding our submission, the Galactic Council expected fear. Instead, they got a history lesson. Never attack a species that turned their own moon into a weapons platform, just in case. The Galactic Council chamber hummed with the usual bureaucratic drone of 1,000 species conducting their daily business. Ambassadors from across the known galaxy floated, slithered, and walked through the crystalline halls of Station Nexus, the political heart of civilized space. For 10,000 years, the Council had maintained peace through careful diplomacy, trade agreements, and the occasional show of force against upstart civilizations who didn't understand their place in the cosmic order. High Chancellor Vexthor, a being composed primarily of sentient gas contained within an ornate pressure suit, called the emergency session to order. His species, the Ethereals, had held the Chancellor position for 3 millennia running, their logical minds and lack of biological imperatives making them ideal neutral arbitrators. Today, however, even Vexthor's usual calm seemed strained. "The matter before us is simple," Vexthor announced, his voice resonating through translation matrices that converted his frequency emissions into forms comprehensible to the assembled delegates. "The human species of Sol 3, designation Earth, has refused our standard assimilation protocols for the 7th consecutive cycle. They have rejected our trade frameworks, dismissed our cultural integration programs, and most disturbingly, have continued their unauthorized expansion into unclaimed systems." A ripple of concern passed through the chamber. The Zephrons, a race of crystalline beings who controlled the largest merchant fleet in the galaxy, vibrated with barely contained frustration. Ambassador Krishak stepped forward, their crystalline body refracting the chamber's ambient light into rainbow patterns across the walls. "The humans have established 17 colonies in the past decade alone," Krishak stated, their voice like wind chimes in a storm. "They bypass our approved settlement zones. They ignore quarantine protocols around developing species. They've even had the audacity to refuse our currency systems, insisting on their own bizarre economic models. This cannot stand." Commander Throck of the Molten Empire, a hulking reptilian being whose species served as the Council's primary military force, slammed a massive clawed hand onto his delegation's podium. The impact sent small tremors through the floor plating. "The Moltans have monitored their military capabilities. They are laughably primitive. Kinetic weapons, chemical propulsion, no quantum shielding whatsoever. We could pacify their entire species with a single battle group within a planetary rotation." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the chamber. The humans had been an anomaly since first contact 20 years prior. They'd achieved faster-than-light travel through some bizarre manipulation of space-time that their brightest scientists couldn't adequately explain even to themselves. Their ships were crude, inefficient, and somehow managed to be both over-engineered and dangerously underprotected at the same time. By every metric the Council used to evaluate species, humanity should have been grateful for the opportunity to join galactic civilization under the Council's guidance. Instead, they'd been difficult. Ambassador Lisa of the Verdant Collective, a hive mind species of plant-based organisms, added their concern to the growing chorus. "Our psychological analysis indicates this species suffers from terminal individualism. They cannot agree among themselves on basic planetary governance, yet somehow coordinate complex multi-system colonies. They are irrational, unpredictable, and dangerous to the established order." "Then we are agreed?" Vexthor asked, already knowing the answer. In 10,000 years, the Council had never failed to bring an upstart species to heel. The formula was simple: demonstrate overwhelming force, occupy their homeworld, install a Council-friendly government, and within a generation, the new species would be grateful, contributing members of galactic society. It had worked on 743 species. The humans would be 744. The vote was unanimous. Operation Civilized Integration would commence within the week. Commander Throck was given authorization to deploy the 7th Pacification Fleet, a massive armada of 300 warships that had successfully conducted integration operations on 12 previous occasions. It was considered massive overkill for dealing with humanity's ragtag collection of maybe 80 functional warships, but the Council had learned long ago that overwhelming force minimized casualties on both sides. What the Council couldn't know, was that humanity had been preparing for this moment since the day they'd realized they weren't alone in the universe. and humanity's approach to preparation was excessive aboard the UCNS Indomitable, flagship of the United Colonies Naval Service. Admiral Rebecca Chen reviewed the intelligence reports with her senior staff. The Indomitable was one of humanity's newer capital ships, a massive beast of tungsten, titanium, and stubborn human engineering that the galactic community would have classified as adorably primitive if they'd bothered to do a detailed analysis. So they voted to invade us, Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the exhausted tone of someone who'd been expecting this news and was still disappointed to receive it. How predictable. Captain Okafor, what's our timeline? Captain James Okafor, Chen's chief of staff and a veteran of the First Colony Wars, pulled up a holographic display. Unlike the elegant, barely visible projections favored by galactic technology, human holoprojectors created bright, almost aggressively visible images that filled the room with light and data. Intelligence suggests the Molten Fleet will arrive in Sol system within 6 days. Standard formation: 300 ships, mostly cruiser class with about 30 capital ships. They'll expect us to surrender when they show up in force. They'll broadcast their terms, give us maybe 12 hours to respond, then start taking out military installations if we refuse. Textbook Galactic Council integration, Admiral Chen mused. They've probably done this exact operation dozens of times. Show up, flex their muscles, occupy the homeworld, install a puppet government. Has worked for them for millennia, so why change the formula? Commander Sarah Park, the Indomitable's tactical officer, couldn't suppress a grin. Should we tell them about Mars, Admiral? Not yet, Chen replied, allowing herself a small smile. Let's see how they handle Earth's welcome mat first. Colonel Rodriguez, are the colonies prepared? Colonel Martinez Rodriguez, liaison to the Colonial Defense Force, nodded sharply. All 17 colony systems have been on high alert since the Council vote leaked. Each has their complement of system defense platforms operational and their volunteer fleets on standby. The colonists are enthusiastic about the situation. That was putting it mildly, Chen thought. Humanity's colonies weren't like the orderly, council-planned settlements that other species established. Human colonies were chaotic, independent, and in several cases had been founded by people who'd specifically left Earth because they didn't like being told what to do. Telling them that an alien empire was coming to conquer them and integrate them into a galactic government was like throwing gasoline on an already burning fire. Admiral, permission to speak freely? Asked Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the civilian scientific advisor assigned to the fleet. Chen nodded, and Tanaka continued. I've been reviewing the intelligence we've gathered on the Moltan Empire and the Council's military capabilities. Their ships are more advanced than ours in almost every measurable way. Better shields, more efficient power systems, more sophisticated targeting computers. On paper, we shouldn't stand a chance. On paper, Chen agreed. But wars aren't fought on paper, Doctor. They're fought by soldiers, sailors, and pilots who have to make decisions in the heat of battle. And there's one fundamental difference between humanity and every other species in the Council. What's that? Tanaka asked, though Chen suspected the scientist already knew the answer. We're absolutely insane, Captain Okafor interjected with a grin. Every other species in the galaxy developed spaceflight after achieving global unity, solving resource scarcity, and eliminating warfare. They explored space as a unified species with shared goals and logical resource allocation. Humans got into space because we wanted to plant flags before the other guy, Chen continued. We built rockets to deliver weapons across continents before we ever dreamed of using them to reach orbit. We went to the moon not because it was scientifically optimal, but because we were racing another group of humans to get there first. We've been fighting each other for our entire existence, and we got really good at it. Commander Park pulled up another display, this one showing the Moltan fleet's expected approach vector. The Moltans have won every engagement they've ever fought using superior technology and overwhelming force. They've never faced an opponent who couldn't match their tech, so they've never needed to develop creative tactics. Their battle doctrine is essentially show up with more guns than the enemy has and shoot until they surrender. It's worked for 3,000 years. But humans, Colonel Rodriguez added, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Humans have been the underdog in countless battles throughout history. We fought enemies with better equipment, better positions, better everything. And we've learned that sometimes the crazy plan is the one that works precisely because no sane species would ever attempt it. Admiral Chen stood, straightening her uniform. Gentlemen, ladies, it's time to show the Galactic Council what humanity's been building, while they've been busy dismissing us as primitive. Begin Operation Sicilian Defense, and someone send a message to General Williams on Mars. Tell him the guests are coming and to prepare the welcome party. As the staff dispersed to their duties, Chen allowed herself a moment of reflection. The galaxy was about to learn a hard lesson, one that humanity had learned through thousands of years of warfare, exploration, and stubborn refusal to accept limitations. It wasn't the species with the best technology that won wars. It was the species willing to do whatever it took to survive. The species creative enough to turn disadvantages into advantages, and the species crazy enough to look at impossible odds and say, "Hold my beer." The Galactic Council was about to discover that humanity had been holding their beer for 20 years, and they'd spent that time getting very, very prepared for this exact scenario. The Multan 7th Pacification Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system with the precision of a well-oiled military machine. 300 warships, their hulls gleaming with the distinctive blue-green alloy that had become synonymous with Council military might, arranged themselves in the standard intimidation formation. It was designed to maximize visual impact. Capital ships in the center, cruisers forming geometric patterns around them. All of it calculated to make any defending force immediately understand the futility of resistance. Commander Throck stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Righteous Unity, and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. 23 successful integration operations over his career, and soon to be 24. The human's home system spread out before him on the tactical display. A single yellow star, 8 planets of varying sizes, and a debris belt between the 4th and 5th planets. Primitive scanning had shown most of the human population concentrated on the 3rd planet, with smaller settlements on the 4th planet and several moons. Simple, straightforward. Within a day, maybe 2 if the humans were particularly stubborn, this would be over. Begin standard broadcast, Throck ordered. His communications officer, a Zephyrin named Tick-Tick, activated the wideband transmission that would reach every human receiver in the system. Inhabitants of the Sol system. Throck's voice boomed, translated into Earth's major languages by Council translation matrices. This is Commander Throck of the Multan Empire, speaking on behalf of the Galactic Council. Your species has been chosen for integration into galactic civilization. This is a great honor. You will cease all military operations. Power down your defensive systems and prepare to receive Council representatives who will guide you through the transition process. You have 12 standard hours to comply. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. This is your only warning. For several minutes there was silence. The Multan fleet held position, weapon systems on standby, shields at minimal power. This was typically when defending species would frantically broadcast surrender terms or pleas for negotiation. The Council's Xenopsychology department had refined this approach over millennia. The 12-hour window was precisely calculated to give species enough time to panic, consult among themselves and realize the hopelessness of their situation, but not enough time to mount any meaningful resistance. Then finally a response came through. A single video transmission from Earth, originating from what Council records indicated was the humans' primary governmental defense facility in North America. A human appeared on screen. Male, by their species' dimorphic standards, with graying hair and what humans would recognize as the absolutely done expression of someone who'd been through one bureaucratic nightmare too many. He wore what appeared to be a military uniform, with insignia indicating high rank. The nameplate identified him as General Marcus Hamilton, Joint Chief of the United Colonies Defense Force. Commander Throck, General Hamilton began, his voice carrying none of the panic or desperation the Multans had been expecting. Instead, he sounded almost bored. We received your message. I've been authorized by the United Colonies government to provide our official response. Throck leaned forward with interest. Perhaps the humans would be reasonable after all. Our response, Hamilton continued, is no. We're not interested in your integration program. We don't recognize the authority of your Galactic Council, and we'd appreciate it if you'd turn your fleet around and leave our system. We'd like to handle this diplomatically, but we're prepared to do otherwise if necessary. A stunned silence fell over the Righteous Unity's bridge. In 23 integration operations, Commander Throck had never received an outright refusal. especially not delivered with such casual dismissiveness. It was as if the human general was refusing an unwanted sales pitch, rather than responding to overwhelming military force. Perhaps they don't understand the situation, Throck's second-in-command, Sub-Commander Velcro suggested. Their sensors might not be sophisticated enough to fully comprehend the size of our fleet. Enhance the demonstration, Throck ordered. All ships activate full shield systems and perform a synchronized weapons charge. Let them see what they're facing. The Multan fleet complied with parade ground precision. 300 ships simultaneously brought their shield systems to full power, creating a light show as exotic particles interacted with the vacuum of space. Then in perfect unison, every weapons port on every ship began glowing as massive amounts of energy cycled through the plasma cannons. It was a display that had never failed to impress, a visceral demonstration that resistance was futile. General Hamilton watched the display on his screen, then glanced off camera and said something inaudible. Someone handed him what appeared to be a human beverage container. He took a sip, then looked back at the camera with an expression that Throck's xenopsychology training identified as profound disappointment mixed with resignation. "Well," Hamilton said, "we tried the diplomatic approach. Commander Throck, I'm going to give you one more chance to withdraw. If you proceed with hostile action against Earth or any human installation, you will be engaging in an act of war against the United Colonies. And I really need you to understand that we've been preparing for this exact scenario since the day we learned we weren't alone in the universe." "Your threats are meaningless," Throck replied, his patience wearing thin. "You have 80 functional warships against our 300. Your technology is centuries behind ours. You cannot possibly. We have 80 warships that you know about," Hamilton interrupted. "And you're right, our technology is behind yours in a lot of ways. Our ships are slower, our shields are weaker, our weapons are less efficient. But here's something you might not have considered in your 10,000 years of bullying younger species into submission. Sometimes being behind technologically forces you to get creative. And humans, we're very good at creative." Hamilton set down his beverage and leaned toward the camera. "Last chance, Commander. Leave now and we'll forget this ever happened. Continue your integration operation, and you'll discover exactly why humanity spent 200 years fighting itself before we ever left our own planet. We got really good at war, Throck. It's kind of our thing." Commander Throck felt something he rarely experienced: genuine anger. This primitive species, this backwater civilization that had barely mastered faster than light travel, was threatening him. It was absurd. It was insulting. It was time to teach these humans their place in the Galactic Order. "Your 12 hours have expired, General Hamilton," Throck announced coldly. "Prepare to receive the consequences of your defiance. All ships prepare for orbital bombardment of military targets. We'll start with that facility you're broadcasting from." "Well," Hamilton said with a sigh, "don't say we didn't warn you. Earth Defense Command, you are weapons free. Show our guests what we've been working on." That's when Throck's tactical officer screamed, "Commander, energy signatures. Thousands of them. They're everywhere." Throck's tactical display lit up like a human holiday celebration. All across Earth's orbit, massive energy readings were appearing. Stations that Council sensors had dismissed as communication satellites or simple research platforms were suddenly powering up weapons systems. Platforms that hadn't appeared on scanners at all were emerging from stealth, revealing themselves to be armed installations bristling with weapons. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the Moon, Earth's single natural satellite, which Multan intelligence had identified as hosting a small research colony of maybe a few thousand humans, was coming alive with energy signatures. The lunar surface was opening up, massive camouflage doors sliding aside to reveal hundreds, then thousands of launch bays, and from those bays missiles were emerging. Not sophisticated plasma torpedoes or quantum destabilizers, simple primitive kinetic kill missiles, but there were so many of them, thousands, tens of thousands. A swarm of tiny thermal signatures that overwhelmed the Multan fleet's targeting computers. "Evasive maneuvers," Throck bellowed. "All ships activate point defense systems. Intercept those missiles." The Multan fleet's automated defense systems came online, their sophisticated AI-controlled lasers and particle beams tracking the incoming missiles with algorithmic precision. The first wave of human missiles was destroyed efficiently, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated metal and vaporized propellant. The second wave met a similar fate. Even the third wave was mostly intercepted, but the fourth wave got through. Human missiles, it turned out, were primitive by galactic standards, but they made up for technological sophistication with two distinctly human characteristics. They were cheap to manufacture, and humans made them in absolutely obscene quantities. While Council species would design one perfect, efficient missile, humans would design one good enough missile and then build 10,000 of them. The first impacts hit the Moltan fleet's outer screen of cruisers. Council shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and plasma, weren't optimized for the kinetic impacts of multi-ton missiles traveling at a significant fraction of light speed. Shields flashed and overloaded. Then the missiles hit the hulls themselves. Modern Council warships were marvels of engineering. Their hulls composed of lightweight, energy-resistant alloys that could withstand tremendous heat and directed energy. What they weren't designed for was a depleted uranium penetrator moving at relativistic velocity. The physics were simple and brutal. When an unstoppable force met a merely very strong object, the unstoppable force won. 3 cruisers were destroyed in the first 30 seconds of engagement, their hulls breached and their atmosphere venting into space. 5 more were critically damaged, their crews scrambling for survival pods. The Molten fleet, which had entered the Sol system in perfect parade formation, suddenly found itself in complete disarray. "Return fire," Throck commanded, trying to restore order. "Target those orbital platforms. Destroy the launch sites on their moon." The Molten fleet responded with overwhelming firepower. Plasma cannons, each capable of leveling a city block with a single shot, opened fire on Earth's orbital defense network. Human platforms began to die, their relatively weak shields and armor no match for concentrated Council firepower. Dozens of installations were vaporized in the first salvo, and dozens more in the second. But for every platform destroyed, 3 more missiles launched. For every launch base silenced on the moon, 5 more opened. The human defensive strategy was becoming clear, and it was both simple and terrifying. They were trying to win through sheer volume of fire. They didn't need every missile to hit. They just needed enough missiles to overwhelm point defenses, and they had enough missiles. "Commander," Velcro reported, his voice strained, "we've destroyed approximately 40% of their orbital defense network, but we've lost 12 cruisers and 2 capital ships. The missile swarms aren't diminishing. If anything, they're increasing. They must have hundreds of thousands of missiles stored on that moon." "Then we destroy the moon," Throck decided. It was a brutal calculation, but necessary. The humans had obviously spent decades fortifying their satellite and filling it with weapons. "All capital ships focus fire on the lunar surface. Concentrate on the commander." New contacts, multiple fleet strength signatures emerging from behind Earth's moon. This was impossible. Council intelligence had accounted for every human warship. 80 combat-capable vessels, all of which had been tracked and logged. There couldn't be more. But there were. Sliding out from behind Earth's moon, where they'd been hiding in the satellite's sensor shadow, came a fleet of human warships. Not 80, more like 200. They were ugly by Council standards, boxy and industrial, with none of the aesthetic grace that other species built into their vessels. But they were armed, they were moving fast, and they were broadcasting active targeting locks on the Molten fleet. "Admiral Chen sends her regards." General Hamilton's voice came through the communication channel. "You're looking at Task Force Athena, Commander Throck. We built these ships over the last 15 years specifically for this scenario. While your council was dismissing us as primitive, we were preparing for war. While you were assuming we'd be grateful for your guidance, we were building shipyards. And while you were voting to invade us, we were training our crews." The human fleet accelerated into battle formation, moving with a precision that surprised Throck. These weren't panicked defenders. These were trained naval personnel who'd clearly practiced this exact scenario countless times. And as they closed the distance, their weapons came online. The humans opened fire with everything they had. Railguns, the Molten sensors reported, primitive electromagnetic accelerators that fired metal slugs. No exotic particles, no plasma, just refined metal accelerated to tremendous velocities. By Council standards, they were laughably obsolete. But there were so many of them. And they fired so fast. A human railgun, Council engineers had calculated, had about 1/10 the penetrative power of an equivalent mass plasma cannon. But they could fire 20 times faster, cost a fraction as much to build and maintain, and apparently humans mounted them in clusters of 6 or more per ship. The math was suddenly terrifyingly unfavorable. The human fleet tore into the Multan formation like a pack of predators. Their ships were smaller, weaker, and should have been easy prey for Council warships. But they moved like nothing Thrak had ever seen, executing complex maneuvers that Council ships couldn't match without straining their inertial dampeners. The humans were pulling accelerations that should have reduced their crews to paste, but somehow they kept fighting. How are they surviving those G-forces? Velcro demanded, watching as a human destroyer executed a turn that registered at nearly 15 gravities of acceleration. They're insane, Thrak whispered, and for the first time in his long military career, he felt something very much like fear. The battle around Earth had turned into a chaotic mess that bore no resemblance to the clean, orderly engagements that dominated Council military doctrine. Human ships were everywhere, darting in and out of the Multan formation like insects, firing their primitive but devastatingly effective weapons at any target that presented itself. The moon continued to vomit missiles into space in numbers that defied sanity, and somehow, impossibly, the humans were winning. The Multan fleet had lost 42 ships. 42. In less than an hour of combat. Against a species that shouldn't have been able to scratch their shields. Commander Thrak was trying to reorganize his forces, pulling them back into a defensive formation that could better withstand the human onslaught, when his long-range sensors officer made an announcement that sent ice through his veins. Commander, detecting massive energy buildup from the 4th planet. Whatever they're powering up, it's reading as equivalent to our main fleet reactor output. Mars. Thrak had read the intelligence reports. Mars was a terraforming project. A partially habitable planet where humans were slowly making the atmosphere breathable and establishing small colonies. It had a population of maybe 2 million, mostly scientists and engineers. It wasn't a military installation, except it was. The surface of Mars began to open, not just a few missile silos like the moon, but vast sections of the planetary crust itself, revealing an engineering project so massive that Thrak initially thought his sensors had malfunctioned. Beneath the Martian surface, humans had carved out enormous chambers, each easily large enough to house a capital ship. And from these chambers something was emerging. What is that? Velcro breathed. The answer came from General Hamilton, who was now smiling with the satisfied expression of someone who'd been waiting a very long time to reveal a secret. That, Commander Thrak, is the Martian defense grid. We've been working on it since the day we started terraforming the planet. Every cubic meter of rock we removed to create living spaces, we used to build fortifications. Every solar panel we installed for colonists, we hooked up to weapon systems. For 30 years, we've been building the largest fixed defense installation in human history. And what, Hamilton continued, his smile widening, did you think we were doing with all that mass we extracted? Making gravel? The weapons that emerged from Mars made the lunar missile silos look like children's toys. Massive railgun batteries, each barrel larger than a Council cruiser. Particle beam platforms that drew power directly from Mars's geothermal systems. And most terrifying of all, something human engineers had cheerfully designated the rods from God system. Satellite platforms that did nothing but drop tungsten telephone poles from orbit, using Mars's gravity to accelerate them to world-ending velocities. Those are kinetic bombardment platforms, Velcro said, his voice hollow. They're banned by 17 different Council treaties. Funny thing about treaties, Hamilton replied. You have to sign them for them to apply. And last time I checked, the Council was trying to conquer us, not offer us a seat at the negotiating table. The Martian weapons opened fire, and this time, the Multan fleet had no chance to adapt. The railgun rounds were larger, faster, and more numerous than anything the Earth defenses had launched. A single salvo destroyed 8 Council ships outright and crippled another 12. The particle beams, designed and built by humans who'd spent decades studying every scrap of Council technology they could steal, scan, or salvage, tore through Council shields like they weren't there. And then the rods started falling. Simple tungsten telephone poles, each weighing several tons, accelerated by Mars's gravity, and then given an extra boost by magnetic accelerators. They didn't have warheads. They didn't need warheads. They were moving fast enough that when they hit a Council ship, the kinetic energy released was equivalent to a tactical nuclear weapon. All ships, full retreat, Thrak ordered, his pride finally breaking under the weight of reality. Retreat to the heliopause. We need to regroup. But the humans weren't done. As the Multan fleet tried to organize a retreat, the asteroids started moving. Not naturally. Not in orbits. With purpose. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had been written off in Council intelligence reports as a navigational hazard, nothing more. What the Council hadn't known was that humans had been mining those asteroids for decades, and not all of that mining had been for resources. Some of those asteroids had been hollowed out, fitted with engines and packed with explosives. They were essentially flying bombs the size of mountains, and humans had apparently decided to use them. They've weaponized asteroids, Velcro said, his voice empty of all emotion, as if his brain had simply refused to process any more insanity. They've turned celestial bodies into missiles. Of course we did, General Hamilton's voice came through, now joined by a woman's voice that Throck's computer identified as Admiral Chen. What? You thought we'd just leave them sitting there? Every asteroid we've surveyed has 3 options. Mine it for resources, establish a research station on it, or turn it into a weapon. We're efficient like that. The asteroids, all 23 of them that had been secretly prepared for this exact scenario, began accelerating toward the Multan fleet. They weren't fast by ship standards, but they didn't need to be. Each one was billions of tons of rock, metal, and ice moving with enough momentum to devastate anything it hit. Dodging them meant breaking formation. Breaking formation meant exposing flanks to the human fleet, which was still harrying the Multans with their infernal railguns and missiles. Throck made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. All ships, emergency hyperspace transition. We're leaving. Now. Sir, we haven't calculated safe jump coordinates. We could emerge anywhere in any condition. I don't care, jump. The Multan fleet, or what was left of it, began executing emergency hyperspace transitions, jumping away from the Sol system with no coordination and no designated rally point. It was the kind of panicked retreat that would horrify military historians and become a case study in what not to do during a withdrawal. Ships jumped away in random directions, some colliding with each other in the process, others emerging from hyperspace in unknown regions of space. Of the 300 ships that had entered the Sol system with such confidence, only 173 escaped. The rest were destroyed, disabled, or captured by human forces. The mighty Molten 7th Pacification Fleet, which had successfully integrated 12 species into the Galactic Council, had been shattered by a species that galactic civilization had dismissed as primitive and harmless. As the last Multan ship vanished into hyperspace, General Hamilton turned to Admiral Chen on a private channel. Think they got the message? If they didn't, Chen replied, watching the cleanup operations begin on her tactical display, we've got plenty more demonstrations prepared. Colonel Rodriguez is itching to show off what we've done with Venus. Let's hope it doesn't come to that, Hamilton said. We've made our point. The question now is whether the Council is smart enough to learn from it. In the void where the Multan fleet had been, human ships began the grim work of rescue operations, saving Multan crew members from destroyed ships, because that was another thing about humans that the Council had failed to understand. Even after winning a battle decisively, even after being forced into a war they'd tried to avoid, humans would still try to save enemy lives when the shooting stopped. It was inefficient. It was illogical. It was, Admiral Chen reflected, very human. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was, by any standard, the most chaotic meeting in the organization's 10,000-year history. High Chancellor Vexthor attempted to maintain order, but for the first time in living memory the Council chamber had descended into something approaching pandemonium. 300 ships. Ambassador Krishak was practically vibrating with distress, their crystalline body throwing erratic light patterns across the walls. 300 of our finest warships, and they destroyed nearly half of them. In less than 2 hours. How is this possible? Commander Throck, who'd been hauled before the Council to explain the disaster, stood at the central podium looking like he'd aged a century in a day. His usually immaculate military bearing had been replaced by the slumped posture of someone who'd seen something they couldn't quite process. The humans, Throck began, his voice hoarse, were prepared. Not just prepared, but they've been planning for this specific scenario for decades. Everything they've built since achieving spaceflight has been designed with warfare in mind. Their civilian infrastructure is military infrastructure. Their colonies are fortresses. Their research stations are weapons platforms. They're primitives, Ambassador Lysa of the Verdant Collective protested. Our analysis showed they lack quantum shielding. They use chemical propulsion. Their weapons are kinetic instead of plasma-based. How could such inferior technology defeat us? Because they don't fight like us, Throck replied, and there was something haunting in his voice. Every engagement we've ever fought has been about technological superiority. Better shields, more efficient engines, more powerful weapons. But humans? They fight to win using whatever works. They turned moons into weapons platforms. They packed asteroids with explosives. They built ships designed to pull accelerations that should kill their crews. And somehow their crews survived and kept fighting. He pulled up holographic data, showing the Council the readings from the battle. They're willing to accept casualties we would consider catastrophic. One of their ships, a destroyer called the Leonidas, was hit by 5 plasma cannon shots. Its shields were down, its armor was breached, half its crew was dead or dying, and it kept fighting. It rammed one of our cruisers and detonated its reactor. The entire human crew was killed instantly, and they knew it would happen. They did it anyway. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. Deliberate self-sacrifice in combat wasn't unknown in galactic civilization, but it was rare, usually reserved for specific warrior cultures or emergency situations. The idea that a ship's crew would willingly commit suicide just to take out an enemy vessel was disturbing. They're insane, someone whispered. No, Vexthor said slowly, his logical ethereal mind working through the problem. They're survivors. Ambassador Lysa was correct in her assessment that humans are irrational by our standards. But we failed to understand what that irrationality represents. They evolved on a death world. Vexthor pulled up data on Earth, information that had been available but ignored. Class 12 death world, extreme weather systems, tectonic instability, predatory megafauna, microbial life that's actively hostile to complex organisms, atmospheric composition that would be considered toxic by 70% of Council species. And somehow humanity not only survived on this world, but thrived to the point of becoming the apex predator. The data painted a picture that was, in retrospect, obvious. Earth wasn't like the stable, peaceful worlds that had given rise to most Council species. It was a planet that actively tried to kill its inhabitants through natural disasters, diseases, predators, and environmental extremes. Species that evolved on such worlds developed certain characteristics: adaptability, aggression, and an almost pathological determination to survive against impossible odds. Furthermore, Vexthor continued, our psychological analysis was fundamentally flawed. We saw their inability to achieve global unity as a weakness. We interpreted their constant warfare as primitive behavior. We failed to understand that this conflict-driven development made them exceptionally good at warfare itself. While we spent the last 10,000 years in relative peace, enforcing compliance through overwhelming technological superiority, humans spent their entire history fighting each other and developing increasingly sophisticated methods of destruction. Ambassador Krishak's crystalline form had stopped its agitated vibrating. What are you saying, Chancellor? That we should fear them? I'm saying we underestimated them catastrophically, Vexthor replied. And now we must decide how to proceed. Commander Throck, in your professional military opinion, could we defeat humanity in a prolonged conflict? Throck took a long moment to respond. Define defeat. Could we destroy their species? Probably if we committed enough resources and were willing to accept massive casualties. Could we conquer them and integrate them into the Council? No, absolutely not. Even if we managed to occupy Earth and their major colonies, they've spread too far. They have 17 colony systems, and intelligence suggests there are unofficial colonies beyond that. They'd wage asymmetric warfare forever, and based on what I saw, they're very, very good at making warfare expensive for their enemies. They'd become pirates, someone suggested. Raiders attacking our trade routes. Worse than pirates, Throck corrected. Pirates want to steal cargo and survive to spend their ill-gotten gains. Humans would attack our ships with the express purpose of destroying them, even if it meant their own destruction. Every engagement would be bloody. Every convoy would need military escort. Every trade route would become a potential battlefield. They'd turn the galaxy into the kind of war zone they grew up in. The implications settled over the Council like a cold blanket. For 10,000 years, they'd maintained peace through a simple formula. Any species that didn't comply with Council authority would be forcibly integrated or, in extreme cases, quarantined. The system worked because species were rational actors who understood that resistance was futile. Humans, apparently, hadn't gotten the memo about being rational. "We have another problem," announced Ambassador Zeltath of the Luminar Confederation, a species known for their information networks. The battle was broadcast across human networks, uncensored. Every human in their territory watched our fleet get destroyed in real time. More concerning, some of our own species accessed these broadcasts. "The information is spreading. So?" another ambassador asked. "Let them know we suffered a tactical setback." "Well, you don't understand," Zeltath interrupted. "For 10,000 years we've maintained council authority through the perception of invincibility. Species join us because they believe resistance is futile. But now, 17 of our newest petitioner species have seen our fleet get destroyed by a species with inferior technology. What message does that send?" The chamber erupted in argument. Some ambassadors advocated for a massive retaliatory strike, throwing everything the council had at humanity to restore the perception of invincibility. Others suggested diplomatic approaches, offering humanity concessions in exchange for their cooperation. A few, notably the more militaristic species, suggested quarantine. Leave the humans alone in their little corner of space and pretend they didn't exist. High Chancellor Vexthor let the argument continue for exactly 7 minutes, then activated the chamber's resonance dampeners, forcing silence. "Enough. We will put this to a vote. 3 proposals. First, full military engagement with the goal of human subjugation. Second, diplomatic negotiation with the goal of peaceful coexistence. Third, quarantine and non-engagement. You have 30 seconds to vote." The vote was surprisingly one-sided. Only the Molton delegation and 2 others voted for military engagement. Quarantine received moderate support, but diplomatic negotiation won by a significant margin. The council might have been arrogant and bureaucratic, but they weren't stupid. The Battle of Sol system had made one thing abundantly clear. Humanity was willing and able to make any conflict with them extremely expensive in lives, resources, and political capital. "The motion passes," Vexthor announced. "I will lead a diplomatic mission to the Sol system personally. We will negotiate terms of coexistence. Ambassadors Krishak and Zeltath will accompany me. Commander Throck, despite your failure, you will also join us. The humans will want to meet the commander who survived their welcome party." Throck nodded grimly. He suspected the humans would have quite a few pointed questions for him. "One more thing," Vexthor added. "We will not approach with a military fleet. We will take a single diplomatic vessel unarmed with open transponders. We will in effect be placing ourselves at human mercy. Does anyone object?" No one did. They'd all seen the footage of the battle. They knew that if humans wanted them dead, no amount of military escort would save them. The diplomatic vessel Harmonious Understanding entered the Sol system 3 weeks after the battle. Moving slowly and broadcasting peaceful intentions on every frequency humans might be monitoring. The ship was small by council standards, essentially a luxurious transport designed for high-level diplomatic missions. It was unarmed, unarmored, and currently full of very nervous ambassadors. "They're hailing us," the ship's pilot announced, text only in council standard. "They're directing us to coordinates near Earth's moon, something called the Luna Diplomatic Station." "They built a diplomatic station in 3 weeks?" Ambassador Krishak asked, surprised despite themselves. "Actually," the pilot corrected, reading the incoming data. "According to this, they built it 15 years ago. They've just been keeping it mothballed until they needed it. There's a note here that says, and I quote, 'We hoped it would gather dust. Thanks for proving us right about needing it.'" High Chancellor Vexthor would have smiled if his species had the appropriate facial musculature. The humans, it seemed, had a sense of humor about their paranoia. The Luna Diplomatic Station was, like everything else humans built, functional rather than beautiful. It was a rotating wheel design, providing artificial gravity through centrifugal force rather than using the more efficient gravitic systems that council ships employed. The docking procedures were primitive but effective, and within an hour, the council delegation was being escorted through corridors that smelled faintly of recycled air and industrial lubricants. The conference room they were led to was surprisingly comfortable, with accommodations for various species' needs. There was even a pressure chamber for Vexthor's gaseous form. The humans, it seemed, had done their homework on council biology. The human delegation was already waiting. General Hamilton sat at the head of the table, flanked by Admiral Chen and a woman introduced as Secretary Amara Okonkwo, the United Colony's chief diplomat. Several other humans were present, including scientists, military advisors, and legal experts. Chancellor Vexthor, Secretary Okonkwo began, her tone professional but not hostile. Thank you for coming. We appreciate that this must be uncomfortable for you, given recent events. Uncomfortable but necessary, Vexthor replied through his translator. The Council acknowledges that our approach to human integration was poorly considered and executed, without adequate understanding of your species and culture. We are here to discuss terms of coexistence. That's diplomatic speak, for we tried to conquer you. It didn't work. Please don't blow up any more of our ships. General Hamilton interjected with a slight grin. Secretary Okonkwo shot him a look that suggested this wasn't the first time he'd undermined diplomatic protocols. The general is not wrong, Vexthor admitted, and if his tone held a note of amusement, it was likely intentional. The Council operates on principles that have served us for 10 millennia. Species develop spaceflight. We contact them, we offer them membership in the galactic community, and after a period of adjustment, they join. Species who resist are encouraged to reconsider. This system has worked 743 times. But not with us, Admiral Chen said. But not with you, Vexthor agreed, which forces us to reconsider some fundamental assumptions. Secretary Okonkwo, what are humanity's terms? Okonkwo pulled up a holographic display, showing a document that had clearly been carefully prepared. Our terms are straightforward. First, the Galactic Council formally recognizes human sovereignty over the Sol system and all currently established human colonies. No integration, no adjustment period, no council governors or advisors unless we specifically request them. We govern ourselves. Acceptable, Vexthor said immediately. Continue. Second, we want access to council trade networks, but on our terms. We'll trade what we want, when we want, at prices we negotiate freely. No mandatory technology sharing, no forced economic integration. Also acceptable, though this may be more complex to implement given existing council trade regulations. Third, Okonkwo continued, her tone becoming more serious, the council will not interfere with human expansion into unclaimed systems. We'll respect council territorial boundaries and quarantine zones around developing species. But we won't accept arbitrary limits on our growth. This caused some murmuring among the council delegation. Ambassador Krishak spoke up. This could be problematic. The council regulates expansion to prevent resource conflicts and protect developing species. If humans expand unchecked, then we'll run into resource conflicts and make mistakes with developing species, General Hamilton interrupted. And we'll deal with the consequences. We're not asking for permission to do whatever we want. We're telling you that we're going to expand, and you can either work with us to do it responsibly, or watch us do it anyway while getting in our way. One approach leads to cooperation. The other leads to more conflicts like what happened 3 weeks ago. It was blunt to the point of rudeness, but Vexthor appreciated the clarity. You're asking for the rights and responsibilities of a major council power without going through the integration process. We're not asking, Admiral Chen clarified. We're explaining the reality of the situation. You can't conquer us, you tried and failed. You can't intimidate us, we've been preparing for this since we knew you existed. You can't ignore us, we're not going away. So your options are to either treat us as equals and work with us, or be in a constant state of low-intensity conflict with a species that's really good at making conflict expensive. You're essentially threatening us into accepting your terms, Ambassador Lysa observed. No, Secretary Okonkwo corrected firmly. We're offering you a choice. Fight us and lose resources, ships, and political capital, or negotiate with us as equals and gain a trading partner, an ally against actual threats, and access to some rather interesting human innovations that we'd be happy to share under the right circumstances. What innovations? Commander Throck asked, speaking for the first time since the conference began. Admiral Chen smiled. Well, for starters, you noticed our ships pulling 15G turns during the battle. Wondered how our crews survived that? We've developed inertial dampening systems that are considerably more efficient than anything the Council uses. We'd be willing to share the technology in exchange for, say, your shield generator designs. We'd really like to improve our defensive capabilities. You're offering a trade? Vexthor asked, genuinely surprised. You destroyed our fleet? demonstrated clear technological superiority in several areas, and now you want to trade for our technology? We didn't demonstrate technological superiority, General Hamilton said. We demonstrated tactical superiority and strategic preparation. Your ships are still better than ours in most ways. We won because we were willing to do things you'd never consider, like turning asteroids into missiles or accepting 50% casualty rates on some ships. But we'd rather not have to keep fighting like that. We'd prefer to improve our technology through trade and cooperation. It was, Vexthor realized, a remarkably pragmatic approach. Humanity had won the battle, but they were smart enough to know that they'd won through preparation, tactics, and willingness to accept casualties that most council species would find unthinkable. They weren't interested in dominance. They were interested in survival and growth. I must consult with the full council, Vexthor said after a long pause. But speaking personally, I find your terms reasonable. You're asking for what you've clearly earned through force of arms, the right to be treated as equals. The question is whether the council can accept dealing with a species as equals rather than subordinates. There's one more thing, Secretary Okonkwo said. We have 127 Moletown prisoners from the battle. They're being well treated, and we'd like to return them as a gesture of good faith. We don't want your people to think we're the kind of species that mistreats prisoners of war. Commander Throck visibly relaxed. He'd been dreading that conversation. That's more generous than I expected, given the circumstances. We are not monsters, Admiral Chen said quietly. We fought because you invaded our system and threatened our homes. But once the fighting stopped, your people became prisoners, not enemies. We have rules about how prisoners are treated. Following those rules is what separates us from the kind of species that would deserve to be conquered. The meeting continued for several more hours, working through details and clarifications. By the end, the outlines of an agreement had formed. Humanity would be recognized as an independent power with rights equivalent to major council members. They'd gain access to trade networks and diplomatic channels, and in exchange, they'd agree to abide by certain council regulations regarding developing species and not turn any more celestial bodies into weapons without filing the appropriate paperwork first. The paperwork requirement is non-negotiable, Ambassador Zeltath insisted. We're a bureaucracy. We have forms for everything. We can live with paperwork, General Hamilton agreed. We invented bureaucracy as a survival mechanism. We understand its terrible power. As the council delegation prepared to depart, Commander Throck found himself standing with Admiral Chen, looking out a viewport at Earth below. Your planet is beautiful, Throck said quietly. For a death world. It's home, Chen replied. And that's what you never understood. You saw our world as hostile and primitive. We saw it as worth dying for. You calculated acceptable losses in terms of resources and political capital. We calculated them in terms of whether our children would grow up free. That's why you lost. I understand that now, Throck admitted. For what it's worth, Admiral, you and your people fought with honor. I've faced 12 species in integration operations. Yours is the first that I'm glad we lost to. Chen extended her hand in the human gesture of respect. Throck, having studied human customs during his 3 weeks of intensive preparation for this meeting, gripped it firmly. Welcome to the galaxy, humanity, Throck said. Try not to break too many things. No promises, Chen replied with a grin. But we'll fill out the forms first. 6 months after the Battle of Sol, High Chancellor Vexthor presented his report to the full Galactic Council. The chamber was packed, with representatives from all 743 member species present either in person or via holographic connection. The human situation had become the most discussed topic in the galaxy, and everyone wanted to hear the official position. The Council has reached a formal agreement with the human species, Vexthor announced. They have been granted status as an independent power, with full diplomatic and trade rights. They are not members of the Council, but they are recognized as equals in galactic affairs. The announcement caused significant discussion, but less protest than Vexthor had expected. 6 months of data had made certain realities clear to even the most skeptical Council members. Human trade goods had begun flowing into galactic markets, and they were proving surprisingly popular. Human entertainment, violent, irrational, and emotionally excessive by Council standards, had become a phenomenon among younger members of various species. Human food, despite being designed for an omnivorous species from a death world, had developed a following among adventurous gourmands. And human technology, while often crude, was frequently more practical and cost-effective than council equivalents. Furthermore, Vexthor continued, the human approach to problem-solving has already proven valuable. 3 months ago, the Verdant Collective encountered a previously unknown hostile species in the Outer Rim. Standard council protocols failed to establish communication or deter aggression. At the Collective's request, we consulted with human military advisors. Ambassador Lisa of the Verdant Collective rose to address the chamber. The humans provided strategic analysis that was unconventional. Instead of attempting technological intimidation or seeking a diplomatic solution, they suggested what they called aggressive deterrence. We demonstrated our capability and willingness to defend ourselves using tactics the humans recommended. The hostile species immediately sought peaceful contact. They later explained that our previous diplomatic overtures were interpreted as weakness in their culture. The humans understood this because their own history is full of similar situations, Lisa continued. Their advice was crude, sometimes disturbing, but effective. They see conflict through a lens shaped by thousands of years of warfare, and sometimes that perspective is exactly what's needed. Other ambassadors shared similar stories. Human engineers had solved problems that council scientists had considered intractable, not through better technology, but through creative application of existing tools. Human traders had opened markets that council merchants had written off as unprofitable by simply being willing to accept lower margins and higher risks. Human explorers had been the first to make contact with 3 new species, handling the situations with surprising delicacy, given their reputation for aggressive behavior. The question before the council, Vexthor said, is whether we maintain our traditional integration model for future species, or whether we adapt our approach based on what we've learned from humanity. I propose a reform. Species who achieve spaceflight should be offered council membership, but if they refuse, we should respect that refusal and seek cooperative relationships instead of forced integration. The debate that followed was intense and lengthy. Conservative members argued that changing the system that had worked for 10,000 years was dangerous. Progressive members argued that the human situation proved the system was already broken. Pragmatists argued that adapting to new circumstances was simply logical. In the end, the vote was closer than Vexthor had hoped, but the reform passed. The Galactic Council would no longer automatically pursue integration of spacefaring species. They would offer membership, respect refusals, and seek diplomatic relationships with independent powers. It wasn't perfect. Many council members voted for the reform not because they agreed with it philosophically, but because they were terrified of creating more situations like humanity. But Vexthor would take what he could get. Change he'd learned from humanity didn't have to be beautiful or universally supported. It just had to happen. 1 year after the Battle of Sol, the first permanent human embassy opened on Station Nexus. It was, like everything humans built, functional rather than beautiful, and it stood out among the elegant council architecture like a steel box in a crystal palace. The humans didn't seem bothered by this. If anything, they seemed proud of it. Ambassador Marcus Rivera, humanity's first permanent representative to the council, was a former military officer who'd served in the colony wars and later transitioned to diplomacy. He was also, according to council intelligence, selected specifically because he was considered tactful by human standards, which worried several ambassadors who'd met General Hamilton. Rivera's first official function was hosting a reception for council ambassadors, giving them a chance to experience human culture in a controlled environment. The event was well attended, partly out of genuine curiosity and partly out of political necessity. The humans were now a major player in galactic affairs, whether the council liked it or not. "Welcome to the human embassy," Rivera said, addressing the assembled dignitaries. "We know our species has been disruptive to the established order. We invaded galactic politics like a meteor hitting a peaceful planet. But we're here now and we'd like to be good neighbors. So tonight we're sharing some human culture with you. Fair warning. It's weird, it's sometimes violent, and it might not make sense by your standards, but it's ours and we'd like to share it anyway." The reception included human food, ranging from mild dishes that most species could tolerate to extreme cuisines that were treated more as dares than diplomatic offerings. There was human music, spanning thousands of years and dozens of genres. There was human art, from ancient cave paintings to modern holographic installations. And there was human entertainment, carefully selected to showcase both human creativity and the species' peculiar obsession with drama, conflict, and redemption. Ambassador Krishak found themselves in conversation with Rivera, discussing human expansion plans. "We're establishing 3 new colonies this year," Rivera explained, "all in unclaimed systems, all with council oversight to ensure we're not interfering with developing species. We're learning your protocols, even if we think some of them are unnecessarily complicated." "Unnecessarily complicated is how we've maintained peace for 10,000 years, Krishak replied, but there was humor in their tone. The Zephyron had become something of an advocate for human integration into galactic society, much to everyone's surprise. "Fair point," Rivera conceded, "though I'd argue that peace through overwhelming bureaucracy isn't much different from peace through overwhelming firepower. Both work until someone figures out how to bypass the system." "Is that what you did? Bypass our system?" "We didn't bypass it. We just refused to enter it in the first place. There's a difference." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the reception's entertainment area. A group of younger ambassadors, from species that had joined the council relatively recently, were watching human historical documentaries with what could only be described as horrified fascination. "They deliberately crashed aircraft into buildings," one ambassador was saying, "as a military tactic." "Wait until you get to the part about nuclear weapons," another replied. "They built bombs powerful enough to sterilize their own planet, and then they built thousands of them. And they aimed them at themselves?" "Death world species," someone else muttered. "Absolutely insane." Rivera and Krishak joined the group, finding them watching a documentary about human military history. It was a carefully edited version, designed not to traumatize alien viewers too badly, but even the sanitized account was apparently shocking. "Keep in mind," Rivera said gently, "that documentary covers thousands of years of history. We've done terrible things to each other. We've also done beautiful things. We've created art, music, literature, and philosophy. We've helped each other through disasters. We've built societies based on justice, compassion, and cooperation. The violence is part of our history, but it's not all of who we are." "But how did you survive?" one young ambassador asked. "How does a species this violent not destroy itself before reaching the stars?" It was, Rivera reflected, a question humans had asked themselves many times. "I think," he said slowly, "it's because the same traits that make us violent also make us capable of incredible compassion. We're competitive, but we're also cooperative. We're aggressive, but we're also protective. We fight, but we also heal. We destroy, but we also create. We're contradictory, and maybe that's our strength. We can be the worst species in the galaxy and the best species in the galaxy, sometimes simultaneously." The young ambassadors considered this. For species that had achieved spaceflight through logic, unity, and careful planning, humanity's chaotic approach to existence was both terrifying and fascinating. "I have a question," one ambassador said. "In the battle, we saw one of your ships deliberately sacrifice itself to destroy a molten cruiser. The entire crew died. Why would they do that?" Rivera was quiet for a moment. "Because they knew that every enemy ship they destroyed was one less ship that could threaten Earth. They calculated that their deaths could save thousands or millions of lives back home. And they decided that was a trade worth making. But how do you convince someone to make that choice?" "You don't," Rivera replied. "You don't have to. Humans make that choice themselves when they think it matters enough. That's what makes us dangerous, but it's also what makes us worth having as allies. When we commit to something, we commit completely. When we love something, we'll die for it. When we believe in something, we'll fight for it even when the odds say we should surrender." The reception continued late into the station's night cycle. Ambassadors who'd come out of political obligation found themselves genuinely enjoying human hospitality. Conversations flowed, ideas were exchanged, and slowly, carefully, humans began to find their place in galactic society. They would never be ordinary members of the galactic community. They were too aggressive, too chaotic, too willing to take risks that made other species uncomfortable. But over time, they became valuable members despite, or perhaps because of, these traits. When someone needed creative problem-solving, they called humans. When someone needed protection from a threat that didn't respond to conventional deterrence, they called humans. When someone needed someone crazy enough to attempt something impossible, they called humans, and humanity, having fought for their independence and won it, began to relax slightly. They kept their military strong and their defenses prepared, but they also started to explore the galaxy as partners, rather than paranoid survivalists. They traded, they learned, they taught, and slowly, they helped reshape galactic civilization into something that could accommodate species like themselves. High Chancellor Vexthor, watching the reception from his private quarters via holographic feed, allowed himself a feeling that his species rarely experienced: hope. The humans had disrupted everything, broken protocols that had stood for millennia, and forced the Council to reconsider fundamental assumptions about how species should interact. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the galaxy needed. 20 years after the Battle of Sol, a new species achieved faster-than-light travel and sent their first exploratory vessel beyond their home system. The Council, following their new protocols, sent a diplomatic mission instead of a military fleet. Ambassador Marcus Rivera, now retired from his position as human ambassador but serving as a special consultant to the Council, joined the mission. His presence was requested specifically because of his experience with first contact situations. The new species, who called themselves the Kethril, were understandably nervous about meeting an established galactic civilization. Their history was similar to humanity's, violent, competitive, and marked by frequent conflict. They'd achieved spaceflight through competition between rival nations, and they'd developed weapons alongside their peaceful technology. We understand you enforce something called integration protocols, the Kethril ambassador said, nervously during the first official contact. We're willing to discuss membership in your council, but we want to maintain our sovereignty. We don't want to be conquered or controlled. High Chancellor Vexthor, now serving his fourth term after reforms that had made the position more responsive to changing circumstances, responded with what might have been amusement. The Galactic Council doesn't conquer anyone anymore, Ambassador. We offer partnership, not subordination. You're free to refuse our offer if you wish. The Kethril ambassador looked confused, but our intelligence gathered from Council communications suggested that spacefaring species are required to integrate. That was our policy, Vexthor admitted. 20 years ago. Then we met humanity, and they taught us a valuable lesson about respecting other species' independence. What happened? Rivera smiled and leaned forward. We told them no. They sent a fleet to force us to comply. We destroyed half their fleet and sent the rest running. Then we sat down and negotiated as equals. Now we're partners instead of subjects. The Kethril ambassador stared at Rivera for a long moment. You're telling us to fight you if we don't want to join? I'm telling you that you have a choice, Rivera corrected. You can join the Council and enjoy the benefits of membership. You can refuse and maintain your independence while still engaging in trade and diplomacy, or you can try something in between, like humanity did, and forge your own relationship with the Council based on your own needs and values. The point is that it's your choice. Nobody's going to make it for you. Why the change? The Kethril ambassador asked. Why would you give up that power? Vexthor answered. Because we learned that forcing cooperation creates resentment, while offering partnership creates allies. Humanity taught us that species with different perspectives and approaches can contribute to galactic civilization in ways that conformist species cannot. Diversity, it turns out, is more valuable than uniformity. The Kethril eventually chose to join the Council as full members, but on terms they negotiated themselves. They brought their own perspectives, their own innovations, and their own slightly chaotic energy to the galactic community, and they thrived. Other species, watching humanity's success and the Council's adaptation, began asserting their own independence. Some left the Council to pursue their own paths. Others renegotiated their relationships with the Council on more equitable terms. A few chose to maintain the traditional subordinate relationship because it genuinely worked for them. The galaxy became more complicated, more chaotic, and more difficult to govern. The Council's role shifted from absolute authority to facilitation and mediation. It was messy, inefficient, and sometimes frustrating. It was also more vibrant, creative, and alive than it had been in thousands of years. Admiral Chen, now retired and serving as a historical consultant for the United Colonies, gave a lecture on the Battle of Sol to military cadets. At the end, one cadet asked the question that everyone always asked, Admiral, did you know we'd win? Chen smiled. Honestly? No, we thought we'd lose. We thought they'd destroy our defenses, occupy Earth, and force us into their system. But we decided that if we were going down, we'd make them regret attacking us. We'd make it so expensive, so bloody, so traumatic that even in defeat, we'd win by making them never want to fight us again. So the plan was to lose so badly that they'd leave us alone? The plan was to survive by any means necessary, Chen corrected. And sometimes, survival means fighting even when you think you can't win. It means preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. It means being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters to you. She looked at the young faces staring at her. These children who'd grown up in a galaxy that respected humanity rather than pitied or dismissed them. You'll never have to fight the battle we fought. The galaxy is different now, partly because of what we did. But remember the lesson. Nobody gives you respect. You earn it. Nobody gives you freedom. You take it, and nobody will protect what matters to you except you. That's what it means to be human. That's what it's always meant. The cadets saluted, and Chen returned the gesture. Later, standing alone in the empty auditorium, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The Battle of Sol had been terrifying, costly, and desperate. But it had also been necessary. It had established humanity's place in the galaxy not as subjects or curiosities, but as equals. And that, Chen thought, had been worth every ship, every life, and every desperate gambit they'd employed. The galaxy had attacked them thinking humanity would be easy prey. The galaxy had learned otherwise, and in learning that lesson, the galaxy had become a better place for everyone.